In 2009, in the country of Belarus, a small show called The Theorists was aired. It was hailed as the first ever Belarusian sitcom. It was definitely not a hit, but surprisingly, the show did manage to attract some unwelcome attention in America. Chuck Lorre, the king of sitcoms himself, issued a statement, which reads as follows. Belarus is a small, landlocked country next door to Russia, Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. According to Wikipedia, one of its major exports is cattle byproducts, which begs the question, what horrible shape are the cattle in, if all they're good for is felt hats and wallpaper paste? But Belarus does have a bustling TV production industry. One of their most recent hits is a sitcom about 4 nerdy scientists who live next door to a beautiful blonde waitress. The characters are named Sheldon, Leo, Howard, Raj, and Natasha, and the show is entitled The Theorists. Each episode begins with a rapid-fire montage of images which takes us from the dawn of time to the present moment. Keeping with that theme, the montage is scored with what is probably the worst piece of recorded pop music since the dawn of time. And finally, each episode appears to be a Russian translation of a Big Bang Theory episode. When we brought this to the attention of the Warner Brothers legal department, we were told that it's next to impossible to sue for copyright infringement in Belarus because the TV production company that is ripping us off is owned and operated by the government of Belarus. Having no other recourse, I'm hoping that this vanity card will be read by the fine folks making The Theorists, and, racked with guilt, they break down and send us some felt hats. The Kyrgyzstan version of Dharma and Greg already sent me some wallpaper paste. 8th of February 2010. I'm not a legal mind, but I would also like to add that threatening a bloody dictator with a lawsuit for copyright infringement of a Chuck Lorre sitcom is something straight from The Onion. So, that's likely another reason why Warner Brothers didn't take any action against The Theorists. But was this show really worth getting worked up about? Let's discuss. I will begin with a controversial statement. I'm not a hater of the Big Bang Theory. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a fan either. I watched the first 5 seasons every week when it aired. Then, I kind of lost touch and never finished the series. In my opinion, it was an okay sitcom. Above average, but nothing legendary. Recently, I've caught some older episodes on HBO Max, and it has sparked some thoughts in my restless mind. Thoughts about The Theorists, which I also watched back in the day. Considering the statement issued by Chuck Lorre, the series was a carbon copy of the Big Bang Theory. But was it really? Let's listen to the premise. The show follows a group of 5 scientists who work together at a nuclear power plant. Their next-door neighbor happens to be a pretty young blonde who works in a local cafeteria. One of the guys, Seva, tries unsuccessfully to woo her. This does sound fairly similar, but it's far from being a rip-off. It's more like a generic sitcom premise. What about the characters? The guys from the Big Bang Theory are underdeveloped, at least in the first season, but they actually have Tolstoyan levels of depth compared to their Belarusian counterparts. These 5 characters are practically non-existent. They're essentially one stereotypical socially awkward brainiac divided into 5 individuals. First, we have Seva, played by Dmitry Tankovich. He's quite obviously supposed to be the show's version of Leonard. He shares Leonard's fashion sense and attraction to the next-door blonde neighbor. He's a shy and socially dysfunctional biochemist who spouts scientific gibberish frequently. And honestly, that's all I have to say about him. Let me just add that he's the most developed character of them all. Now we have Arles, played by Maxim Ponymachenko. He's the tall guy of the bunch, the best friend of Seva, and a nuclear physicist. You might assume this makes him the Belarusian counterpart to Sheldon. However, he lacks Sheldon's smugness and autistic idiosyncrasies. He's simply another awkward nerd who frequently discusses science. He dresses in a childish fashion, but neither he nor any of the other guys ever discusses pop culture. This crucial element of the Big Bang Theory is completely absent in the Theorists, which makes sense since it's not particularly prominent in Belarus. Ales is most Sheldon-like in episode 3, where he becomes an inventor and fixates on how things are organized in Natasha's cafeteria. This is where the direct connections between American and Belarusian characters end. The next one, Garzik, played by Gennady Fomin, is somewhat reminiscent of Howard. He talks a big game and generally presents himself as more important than he actually is. He's the only one who doesn't live in the same building but has his own house. He likes to boast about it, but oddly enough, he spends all his free time with friends in their apartment and never invites anyone to his place. He's attracted to Natasha, making him a rival to Seva. He probably has the most peculiar haircut of all of them, much like Howard. Boria, played by Oleg Kots, is even less defined. I suppose he's the closest thing this show has to Raj. By that, I mean he's the most stylish dresser and also a foreigner, in this case Ukrainian. His catchphrase, "back home in Odessa," allows him to brag about things he allegedly did. It's strange that on the show's Wikipedia page, he isn't even listed among the main cast, despite working at the power plant like the other guys, sharing the apartment with Kolya, and appearing in every episode. And finally we have Kolya, portrayed by Yevgeny Smorigin. He's probably the most socially dysfunctional of the group. He appears to be slow, even though he's a mathematician. When it comes to formulas, he gets worked up and might break something in frustration. He always conveys his true feelings through facial expressions, but never admits them verbally. He stutters and becomes flustered around women. I'm not entirely sure who he's supposed to be. Probably Raj as well, but specifically Raj in the company of women. There's not much to say about Natasha. She's attractive and blonde. She ended up working at the cafeteria purely by accident, but wants to become an actress. So, I guess she's this show's version of Amy. Chuck Lorre claims that each episode of The Theorists appears to be a Russian translation of a Big Bang Theory episode. Is he right? Let's see. In episode 1, we meet the main cast. Seva and Ales are newcomers to the local nuclear power plant. They move into apartment 6 but find people already living there, specifically Kolya and Boria. The guys have a bit of a fight, but quickly become friends. Eventually, when Seva and Ales realize they were supposed to move into apartment 9 instead of 6, Kolya and Boria want them to stay. Oh, and Seva falls in love with Natasha, who lives next door. My verdict is that this is some pretty generic sitcom material, but not a copy of a Big Bang Theory episode. In episode 2, not much happens. Seva tries to ask Natasha out, but Garzik acts faster. Then Seva persuades her to go out with him instead, out of pity, and tricks Garzik into blowing her off. Seva and Natasha have a rather dull date, but in the end she invites him to her apartment for tea with marmalade. However, Seva freaks out and leaves. Now this one does remind me of the third episode of the Big Bang Theory Season 1, where Leonard asks Penny out to dinner, but she misinterprets this as an invitation to hang out with all the guys, so he comes up with reasons for their absence from the date. Still, I would argue that both of these episodes are simply generic sitcom material. However, episode 3 of The Theorists is where we really step deeply into plagiarism territory. Consider this. Ales gets fired by the new head of the power plant, so he spends his time doing all kinds of scientific experiments, such as creating a luminous fish. He gets his job back after Boria's mother flirts with the guy. Meanwhile, in episode 4 of The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon is fired from his job after insulting his new boss. This triggers a downward spiral of depression, in which Sheldon fails to improve scrambled eggs, develops luminous fish for nightlights, and weaves on a hand loom. Worried, Leonard calls Sheldon's mother. She finally forces Sheldon to apologize, and he is given his job back after she flirts with his boss. This episode goes beyond merely following the same plot threads. This is a rip-off. However, in the 4th and final episode of The Theorists, we return to more original content, though still rather generic. It's New Year's Eve, so the guys organize a party for Natasha. It involves some dressing up, so one might argue that this episode resembles a response to the Halloween episode of The Big Bang Theory. But I wouldn't go that far. To me, it's just another generic sitcom scenario. So what's my verdict? When it comes to screenplays, The Theorists is hardly a carbon copy of The Big Bang Theory, maybe with one exception. I wouldn't go as far with the accusations of plagiarism as Chuck Lorre. However, I will admit that several jokes were directly lifted from The Big Bang Theory. Seva and Arle's spoiling Gazik's crossword, Seva attempting to impress Natasha by showing off his language skills.
Hello. Bonjour. Ni hao.
Bon douche.
I'm sorry?
It's French for a good shower. It's a sentiment I can express in 6 languages.
The olive lifting trick with a glass.
Wow, centrifugal force.
Actually, it's centripetal force.
Смотри, я сейчас подниму эту оливку стаканом.
Это центробежная сила.
Вообще-то центростремительная.
And of course, episode 3 as a whole was a rip-off. So, while I believe labeling The Theorists as a clone of The Big Bang Theory is a bit extreme, one must agree that it was heavily inspired by the American original. However, you might be wondering whether the show was any good. No, God no! It was criminally unfunny. And I know unfunny because I'm unfunny myself.
Ну что, Лис, ничего ты не понимаешь в девушках. О, камин.
Moreover, it was exceptionally cheap. We never see the guys at work. The show only takes us to the guy's apartment, the corridor, Natasha's apartment, and the cafeteria, which is as abandoned as Chernobyl. Oddly enough, the abysmal quality of The Theorists wasn't the reason why the show got cancelled after only 4 episodes, making it one of the shortest-lived TV shows in history. No. Actually, as soon as it became known that the show was unlicensed, the main cast quit as a sign of protest, prompting the producers to cancel it. Dmitry Tankovich, who plays Seva, mentioned in an interview, "I'm upset. At first, the actors were told that all legal issues were resolved. We didn't know that wasn't the case, so when the creators of The Big Bang Theory started discussing the show, I felt embarrassed. I can't comprehend why our people act first and think later. I consider this the lowest point of my career. I don't want to be part of a stolen show. Cheers, mate. Now, that's integrity." Anyway, that's all I got for you today. Did you watch The Big Bang Theory? Were you a fan or a hater of the show? Have you ever heard about The Theorists? What clones and rip-offs of better shows do you know? Would you like me to talk about the Russian version of How I Met Your Mother? If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it. Bye.